I'm Naomi Rise, and if you had met me a year ago, you probably would have said I had my life together. I was 31, living in Phoenix in a one-bedroom apartment above a florist shop, working as a cybersecurity analyst for a hospital network, paying my own bills, fixing my own problems, and answering to no one. On paper, I looked stable, successful even. But paper never tells the whole truth, does it? Paper can say you're independent while your family still has a hand wrapped around your throat. It can say you've moved on while one phone call from your mother can send you spiraling straight back into the version of yourself that learned to apologize for taking up space. That was me. Every holiday, every birthday, every family event, I became Naomi the difficult one again. Naomi the cold one. Naomi the daughter who never appreciated anything. My younger brother Matteo got to be charming, careless, adored. I got to be competent, useful, and somehow still disappointing. I grew up in San Antonio, in the back rooms of Reyes Grill, the family restaurant my grandparents built from nothing. Some of my earliest memories are of stacking napkins at a corner booth while my grandmother counted receipts, and my mother floated through the dining room like she owned not just the restaurant, but the people inside it. My father used to soften everything. He had this calm, steady way about him, like he could absorb whatever sharpness my mother threw into a room and make it less dangerous. But he died when I was 12, and after that, something in our house shifted permanently. My mother didn't collapse under grief the way people expected. She sharpened. She poured all her softness into Matteo, who was 9 then, all wide eyes and easy smiles, and she looked at me like I was a debt she never meant to owe. People said I reminded her of my father, and I used to think that meant she saw something precious in me. I know better now. I reminded her of a life she couldn't control. Matteo was easy to shape, I wasn't. So he became the golden child, and I became the cautionary tale. By the time I left for college, I had already learned the rules of survival in my family. Don't ask for praise because it won't come. Don't complain because it will be used against you later. Don't outshine Matteo. Don't challenge mom in public. Smile when you're insulted. Be helpful. Be useful. Be quiet. I got good at all of it, so good that for years people mistook my silence for strength. The truth was uglier. I wasn't strong. I was trained. Even after I moved to Phoenix and built a life that had nothing to do with the restaurant, I still picked up when my mother called. Still flew home when she needed help. Still let myself be dragged back into family pageants where Matteo got celebrated and I got assigned responsibilities. I told myself I did it for my grandmother, for tradition, for peace. But deep down, I think there was still a small, humiliating part of me that wanted my mother to someday look at me with warmth and mean it. Then Matteo got engaged to Sabrina Chen, and suddenly the family machine kicked into overdrive. Sabrina was beautiful, polished, and smart in a way that made my mother both proud and uneasy. She came from a good family, had a strong career in commercial real estate, and asked the kind of direct questions people in my family hated answering. The engagement party was supposed to be the event of the season, held in the courtyard behind Rye's Grill with string lights, live music, custom menus, and enough champagne to drown every unspoken truth in the family. 3 weeks before the party, my mother called me in that sugary tone she uses when she's about to hand me unpaid labor disguised as love. She told me Matteo was overwhelmed. Sabrina's family had high standards, and she needed someone competent to come early and help organize everything. Someone competent. That was her favorite compliment for me, because it never sounded like affection. It sounded like a job description. And like always, I said yes. I drove into San Antonio 2 days before the party and walked straight into chaos. Florists unloading centerpieces, servers ironing linens, my Aunt Lydia shouting at someone on the phone about rentals, and my mother stalking through the restaurant in heels, issuing orders like a film director with a deadline. Matteo was useless, of course. He was standing by the bar, tasting signature cocktails and joking with Sabrina, while I spent the first 6 hours fixing the projector setup, proofreading menus, coordinating table assignments, managing the photo display, and smoothing over vendor mistakes no one else had even noticed yet. That was my place in the family. Matteo got the spotlight. I made sure the spotlight turned on. And every time someone praised how beautiful things looked, My mother accepted it with a smile, as if she had hung every light and folded every napkin herself. The first sign that something was wrong came late that night. I was in the back office printing a revised timeline for the speeches when I noticed a stack of sealed manila envelopes on the desk. Dozens of them. Each one had a guest's name written neatly across the front in my mother's handwriting. At first I assumed they were thank you cards or seating notes or some dramatic little keepsake she had dreamed up for the party. But then I saw one envelope slightly open, just enough to show the edge of a typed document inside. Mine. My name was on it. I froze. I don't know what made me pick it up. Instinct, maybe? Self-preservation. Years of being ambushed by that woman had taught me to recognize danger even when it was dressed in stationery. I slid the paper out just far enough to read the title, and my whole body went cold. Repayment Acknowledgement. Under that, in clean formal language, was my full name and a figure so absurd it almost made me laugh. $192,440. Attached was a ledger listing the supposed financial burden I had placed on my mother over the course of my life. Tuition, medical bills, emotional stress, emergency support, lost income. Every line was designed to tell the same story, that I was costly, difficult, ungrateful, and permanently indebted to her. My eyes ran down the page faster, and that's when the nausea hit. Some of the charges weren't just cruel, they were lies. Others were twisted versions of things that had happened to Mateo, not me. She wasn't planning a private confrontation. She was planning a public humiliation at my brother's engagement party, in front of the whole family and Sabrina's relatives and whoever else she wanted as witnesses. I put the paper back exactly where I found it, sealed the envelope, and stood there in the office with my heart pounding so hard it felt visible through my shirt. I should have left right then. I should have gotten in my car, driven back to Phoenix, blocked everyone, and let them implode without me. But I didn't. Because as I stood there staring at that stack of envelopes, something old and exhausted inside me finally hardened into clarity. My mother thought I would do what I had always done. She thought I would walk into the trap, cry, shrink, and let her define me in front of a crowd. What she didn't know was that I wasn't the same daughter she'd been training all those years. I worked in cybersecurity. I traced patterns for a living, and for the past year I had quietly been collecting my own evidence. That envelope didn't just expose her plan. It told me something even more important. She still believed I was powerless. And for the first time in my life, I knew she was wrong. By the time the engagement party started the next evening, I felt like I was walking around with a live wire wrapped under my skin. Everything looked beautiful in the way events designed by controlling women often do. The courtyard behind Raya's grill had been transformed with white roses, low gold lanterns, flickering candles floating in glass cylinders, and strings of warm lights suspended above the tables like a net meant to catch everyone beneath it. The mariachi trio was set up near the fountain. The cake was 4 tiers of polished perfection. Sabrina looked stunning in a pale blue dress that made her seem both elegant and approachable, and Mateo, of course, looked completely at ease, grinning, shaking hands, accepting compliments like they were oxygen. My mother moved through the crowd in a fitted emerald gown, touching shoulders, air-kissing cheeks, thanking everyone for coming, as if she were not just hosting a party but blessing a kingdom. If you didn't know her, you would have thought she was radiant. If you did know her, really know her, you would have recognized the brightness for what it was: anticipation. She was waiting for her moment. I stayed busy because that was the only way to keep from unraveling. I checked the projector, coordinated the timing for the tribute slideshow, confirmed the cake-cutting cue with the DJ, made sure the champagne flutes were polished, and fixed a last-minute problem with the microphone battery. That was another lifelong skill of mine, functioning while furious. People smiled at me all night, thanking me for the setup, complimenting the flowers, asking how work was going in Phoenix, and every time I smiled back, I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body. I kept wondering if anyone else could feel the shift in the air, the sense that the night had teeth hidden under all the lace and candlelight. A few times I caught my mother glancing at me from across the courtyard, and every time she did, there was that tiny, private smile at the edge of her mouth. She knew something I was supposed to fear. She thought she had already won. Dinner stretched on in courses and speeches. Sabrina's father gave a polished toast about partnership and trust. My Aunt Lydia cried over Matteo growing up too fast. My grandmother Isabella said only a few words, but they carried more weight than everyone else's combined. She looked directly at Sabrina and told her that marriage was not built on charm, but on character, and for a strange second I saw Sabrina's eyes flick toward Matteo, as if she were quietly filing that away. Then the band softened, dessert plates were cleared, and my mother stood. She tapped her champagne flute with a fork, and the entire courtyard settled into silence. I knew before she even opened her mouth. Not because I'm dramatic, because predators have a rhythm, and I had lived with hers my whole life. She began exactly the way I expected, warm, sentimental, polished. She thanked everyone for celebrating this beautiful union, praised Sabrina's grace, called Matteo the joy of her life, and then drifted into one of her favorite subjects, sacrifice. The unseen labor of parents, the burdens carried by mothers, the thankless work of building a family. Her voice trembled at just the right moments. Her eyes glistened under the string lights. If I hadn't known what was coming, I might have admired the performance. Then she shifted like a knife turning. "And of course," she said, smiling out at the crowd, "family isn't just about celebrating blessings. It's also about accountability, about honesty, about understanding what has been given to us." I felt every muscle in my body lock. She looked right at me. Especially for children who confuse support with entitlement. Right on cue, servers began placing sealed envelopes at each table, not just for family, for everyone. Sabrina's parents, their friends, business acquaintances, my cousins, my uncles, people who barely knew me. I heard little laughs at first, the kind people give when they assume something is a game or a party favor. Then the paper opened. Silence spread outward in waves. I watched faces bend toward the pages, watched eyebrows lift, watched discomfort bloom table by table. My mother let it happen. She let them read. She let the humiliation settle in before she delivered the final blow. "Naomi," she said sweetly, "I know you may be embarrassed, but sometimes love requires hard truths. Since you've always kept such distance from this family, I thought it might help for everyone to understand just how much has been poured into you over the years." My mouth went dry, but I said nothing. Not yet. She lifted her own copy from the podium. $192,440, she announced, like she was revealing an auction total. That is what it cost me to raise my oldest daughter. School tuition, car insurance, emergency interventions, medical expenses, counseling, financial rescue, lost work, emotional strain. A few people actually looked at me with pity, and somehow that was worse than contempt. It was the pity she had always engineered, the kind that makes the abuser look saintly and the target look impossible. My mother continued, her voice soft with practiced hurt. "I don't expect repayment tonight. This isn't about money. It's about gratitude, respect, recognition." Then she smiled at me with that poisonous tenderness I knew so well. "Sometimes accountability is love." That line hit me like a slap. Not because it was new, but because it was old. She had been dressing cruelty in noble language my entire life. Every insult was correction, every humiliation was guidance, every act of control was sacrifice. She expected me to break right there in front of everyone, to either storm out and prove her unstable daughter narrative, or stand frozen and let the shame do its work. For a second, I felt 12 years old again, standing in the kitchen while she explained to relatives why I was so difficult lately. For a second, I could almost hear myself apologizing. Then something inside me went cold and steady. I realized she had made one enormous mistake. She had done this in public. She had given me a room full of witnesses. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped the stone hard enough to make a few heads turn. My mother's smile shifted, just slightly, because she knew my silence too well to trust movement. I walked past the family table, past Sabrina, who looked confused and horrified, past Matteo, who wouldn't quite meet my eyes, and straight toward the DJ booth. The music had already stopped, but I reached for the microphone anyway. The DJ hesitated for only a second before handing it to me. Maybe he sensed a bigger show coming. Maybe he just didn't want to get caught in the middle. I took the microphone, turned, and looked out over the courtyard. 62 faces stared back at me. some curious, some embarrassed, some eager in that ugly way people get when they sense drama they won't have to pay for. My mother gave a little laugh. "Naomi, honey, let's not make a scene." I looked straight at her. "A scene?" I repeated. "You printed fake debt statements and handed them out at your son's engagement party. I think we're past that." A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone shifted in their seat. Someone else put their envelope down like it had suddenly become dangerous to hold. My mother's expression tightened. "Those aren't fake." I nodded slowly and reached into my bag for my phone. "That's interesting," I said, "because I brought receipts." Then I lifted the phone and looked around the courtyard, my pulse suddenly calm, my voice steadier than I felt. "Since we're doing honesty tonight, let's do all of it. You want everyone to understand what things cost? Fine. Let's start with what my father's death paid for." And just like that, the night stopped belonging to her. I connected my phone to the projector with hands so steady they didn't even feel like mine. For years, my mother had counted on one thing above all else: that I would crack before she did. That I would fold under the pressure of public shame, retreat into silence, and let her tell the story for both of us. But I work in cybersecurity. I know what happens when someone thinks they've covered their tracks so completely that they stop being careful. They get sloppy. They repeat themselves. They leave patterns. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. My mother had spent decades building a version of me for public use: the cold daughter, the ungrateful daughter, the expensive daughter, the one who took and never gave back. What she never understood was that every lie requires maintenance, and maintenance leaves a trail. I pulled up the first document and projected it onto the screen that had been meant for baby photos, engagement portraits, and smiling family memories. Instead, the courtyard filled with bank records. "I want to clarify something," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "My mother says she sacrificed everything to raise me. She says money was poured into me, that I owe her for all the support I received. But when my father died, he left behind a life insurance policy worth $286,000. I heard gasps before I even clicked to the next page. For years, we were all told that money was swallowed by medical bills, funeral costs, and restaurant debt. That there was nothing left. That the family had to struggle. That I needed to lower my expectations and be grateful for whatever scraps remained." I let the room sit with that. Then I switched to the transfer records. Only that wasn't true. Some of the policy did go toward debt, but $40,000 was transferred into my mother's personal account. 2 months later, nearly the same amount was used to fund Mateo's food truck business. Across the courtyard, my brother's face lost all color. He looked at my mother, then at me, and for the first time all night he looked less offended than frightened. "I didn't know that," Mateo said quickly, too quickly. I turned toward him. "Maybe not where it came from," I said. "But you knew someone was always cleaning up behind you." That landed harder than I expected. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I clicked again. "Then there's the loan." The next document appeared on the screen, and this time several people leaned forward in their seats. A $12,000 personal loan was opened in my name when I was 24. I didn't apply for it. I didn't authorize it. But my social security number was used, my driver's license was copied, and the mailing address listed on the application was Reyes Grill. I paused just long enough for that to sink in. The emergency contact named on the application was Mateo Reyes. Sabrina went very still beside him. One of her hands slipped off the edge of the table and into her lap, like she needed to physically pull herself back from the version of him she thought she knew. My Uncle Tomas stood up so fast his chair screeched over the stone. "Luz," he said to my mother, his voice low and dangerous. "Tell me this isn't real." But my mother wasn't denying anything now. She was moving into her next form, the one she uses when truth gets too close: outrage. "This is what she does," she snapped, pointing at me like I was the scandal instead of the evidence on the screen. "She hoards information, twists things, waits for the worst possible moment. She always wants to embarrass this family." I almost laughed at the audacity of that. "No, Mom," I said. "You embarrass this family. I'm just explaining why." Then I lifted my phone again. "And since you were so determined to use tonight to expose me, I think it's only fair everyone hears how you talk when you think no one else is listening." The second I said that, I saw it happen. The real fear. Not irritation, not indignation, not theatrical hurt. Fear. My mother took one step toward me. "Naomi," she said, and there was no sweetness left in her voice now. "Don't." That one word told the whole courtyard more than any speech she could have made. People who had still been wavering shifted in their seats. Sabrina turned slowly toward my mother. My grandmother, Isabella, seated near the fountain in her black shawl, narrowed her eyes but didn't move. I swallowed once, pressed play, and held the microphone close enough for every word to carry. My mother's voice spilled into the night, hard and familiar and stripped of all performance. "Mateo, listen to me carefully. If Sabrina asks again, you tell her Naomi is unstable and jealous. Don't let her talk to your abuela alone. Your grandmother still thinks the restaurant should eventually go to Naomi because she's responsible. We can't let that happen. After everything I put into you, this place belongs to my son, not to some cold little copy of her father. And if Naomi keeps digging into the old accounts, I swear I'll bury her in legal fees before I let her take what's yours." The voicemail ended, but the silence afterward was louder than anything I'd ever heard. Not a fork clinked, not a chair moved. It was the silence of a room watching a mask come off and realizing it had never known the face underneath. Sabrina was the first person to react. She stood up so abruptly her chair tipped backward. She looked at Mateo, really looked at him, like she was comparing the man in front of her to every conversation they'd ever had about family, trust, and the future. "Did you know?" she asked him. Mateo opened and closed his mouth before finally saying, "Not all of it." It was the worst answer he could have given. Sabrina actually laughed once, short and disbelieving, then reached up and pulled off her engagement ring. "That's enough for me," she said. She set it down beside her untouched champagne glass and turned to my mother. "And for the record, any woman who has to destroy her daughter to protect her son isn't preserving a family. She's poisoning one." Then she looked at me, and whatever confusion had been on her face earlier was gone now. "I'm sorry," she said softly, and walked out through the courtyard gate without looking back. Mateo called her name once, but it sounded weak, almost childish. He took a step as if to follow her, then stopped, caught between humiliation and paralysis. My mother made a strangled sound, somewhere between anger and panic, and that was when my grandmother finally rose. She didn't hurry. She didn't need to. The whole courtyard seemed to part for her automatically. She crossed the stone patio in measured steps until she stood directly in front of my mother. Then she held out her hand. "Keys," she said. My mother blinked at her. "Mama, not now." My grandmother didn't raise her voice. "The office keys, the safe keys, the restaurant keys, now." My mother's face went slack with disbelief. "You're taking her side?" My grandmother's expression didn't change. "I am taking the side of truth," she said. "Something you have treated like an enemy for far too long." My mother's hand shook as she reached into her purse, but she still tried one last performance. "Everything I did for this family." My grandmother took the key ring from her fingers and turned to Uncle Thomas. "Change the alarm code tonight," she said. "Lock her out of the office, the accounts, and the liquor storage. Effective immediately, Luz no longer manages anything in this business." Then she looked back at my mother with a calm so complete it was almost cruel. "You had one daughter you used, one son you spoiled, and one legacy you nearly destroyed. That ends tonight." Around us, chairs scraped. Whispers rose. My Aunt Lydia began tearing the envelope on her table into thin, furious strips. Cousins stood and moved away from my mother like proximity itself had become dangerous. And me? I stood there in the middle of the wreckage with a microphone in my hand, breathing harder than I wanted anyone to see, knowing one thing with absolute certainty. The woman who had controlled the story of my life for 31 years had just lost the room. The next morning, I went back to Ray's Grill because my grandmother texted me 6 words that didn't sound optional. "Be here at 9. Come alone." I barely slept the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the voicemail again, heard my mother's voice stripped of performance, cold and vicious, and certain that she could still decide who got to belong. I kept replaying the look on Sabrina's face when she took off her ring, The stunned silence after my grandmother demanded the keys. The way Matteo had stood there like a man watching a bridge collapse under his own feet. I thought I would wake up feeling triumphant, but that wasn't what it was. I felt hollowed out, cleaned out, like something rotten had finally been cut from me, but the wound was still open and raw. When I parked in front of the restaurant that morning, the sign looked the same. The patio chairs still stacked, the windows still dark. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into that building as the daughter who should keep her head down. I was walking in as the person who had told the truth out loud, and there was no undoing that. Inside, the restaurant was quiet in a way I had almost forgotten it could be. No lunch prep, no clatter from the kitchen, no hum of customers, just sunlight filtering through the front windows and dust floating above the empty booths. My grandmother was waiting in the office with Uncle Thomas and a lawyer I recognized from my grandfather's funeral. There was a folder on the desk, thick and neatly arranged, and my grandmother's reading glasses sat beside it. She didn't ask how I was. She looked at me for a long moment, like she was measuring not my pain, but my readiness. Then she told me to sit down. The lawyer slid the folder across the desk. I opened it and saw ownership documents, trust amendments, operating authority transfers. At first, the words blurred together because my brain refused to catch up to what my eyes were seeing. Then the lawyer explained it plainly. My grandmother had removed my mother from all management control, effective immediately. Matteo's future claim to the business had been suspended pending financial review and restitution. And me, the difficult daughter, the expensive daughter, the daughter my mother had spent years trying to write out of the family story, I was being named co-owner of Ray's Grill, with majority control to transfer to me when my grandmother retired or passed. I stared at the paper so long my grandmother finally reached out and put her hand over mine. "This is not a reward for suffering," she said quietly. "I need you to understand that. I am not doing this because I pity you. I am doing this because I have eyes." My throat tightened. She told me she had been watching for years. Watching who showed up early and left late. Watching who fixed problems without being asked. Watching who treated the restaurant like a legacy instead of a prize. She said my grandfather had always admired my steadiness, and that after he died, she started seeing more clearly how my mother confused control with strength and favoritism with love. "I should have intervened sooner," she said, and hearing that from her hurt more than I expected, because it was the first honest apology I'd heard from anyone in my family. But I will not make the mistake of waiting any longer. I told her I didn't want to move back to San Antonio, and I expected disappointment, maybe even pressure. Instead, she nodded. "Good," she said. "I am not handing you a cage and calling it an inheritance." That line nearly broke me. For once, someone in my family was offering me something without demanding I disappear inside it. So we made a plan that actually belonged to me. I would stay in Phoenix, keep my job, and help modernize the restaurant from a distance. Security systems, payroll controls, vendor authentication, accounting oversight, the kind of infrastructure no one notices until it fails. Uncle Thomas would handle daily financial operations. My grandmother would remain the public face and final authority until she was ready to step back. It was practical, respectful, real. No guilt, no manipulation, no speech about sacrifice. When I signed the preliminary documents, my hands shook a little, but not from fear, from disbelief. I had spent so long being told I was a burden that I didn't know what to do with being trusted. Matteo texted me that afternoon. The first message came in angry, accusing me of humiliating Mom, destroying his engagement, and turning Abuela against him. I didn't answer. An hour later, he sent another one, shorter this time. "Did you know she used restaurant money for the loan?" I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back 2 words. "You knew enough." He didn't respond after that. And honestly, I didn't need him to. I wasn't interested in excavating his conscience for scraps of remorse. My entire life, Matteo had survived by accepting whatever version of events made him feel least responsible. Whether he was a victim of our mother too, or just the favored child who never asked where the favor came from, I couldn't answer that for him. That was his work now, not mine. My mother, of course, didn't stay silent. 3 days later, she showed up outside my apartment building in Phoenix. I saw her through the lobby glass standing on the sidewalk in oversized sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast, clutching her purse like she was still walking into a room she expected to control. For a moment, I just stood there and watched her, trying to feel what I was supposed to feel. Rage, satisfaction, grief. What I felt, surprisingly, was distance. Not emotional numbness, exactly. More like clarity. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not fragile, just diminished. Like someone who had spent decades feeding on attention and suddenly found herself starving. I stepped outside, but I didn't invite her in. She started speaking immediately, launching into a messy mix of blame and pleading. She said I had embarrassed her. She said family should handle things privately. She said I had turned everyone against her. She even said, unbelievably, that she had always been hard on me because she knew I was strong enough to take it. That was the closest she came to admitting anything. And even then, she dressed abuse up as confidence in my character. I let her talk until she ran out of momentum. Then I told her calmly that she didn't get to come to my home and reframe cruelty as parenting. I told her what I had said at the restaurant was true, what she had done was documented, and what she had lost was the direct result of her own choices. She tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I told her that if she contacted my employer, showed up again uninvited, or attempted to interfere with the restaurant's transition, I would stop treating this like a family wound and start treating it like the fraud case it was. I watched that hit her, really hit her. For the first time in my life, my mother seemed to understand that my boundaries were not requests. They were walls. She asked me in a small, bitter voice if I was really willing to cut her off forever, and I remember looking at her and realizing the question no longer had the power it once did. "I'm willing," I said, "to stop letting you hurt me and call it love." Then I went back inside and locked the door. That night, I sat on my couch with the city humming below my windows and realized something strange. The story wasn't ending with revenge. It was ending with choice. My grandmother had given me one. My mother had lost hers. Mateo was finally facing his. And me? For the first time since I was a little girl standing in the back hallway of Ray's Grill trying to figure out how to be easier to love, I understood that my life did not belong to the people who had misnamed me. I was never the debt. I was never the burden. I was the one who survived the accounting. And now, finally, I was the one writing what came next. Thank you so much for staying with me all the way to the end of this story. If this story touched you in any way, please leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you won't miss the next story. Your support truly means a lot. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you again in the next story. Goodbye for now.